On November 21st, 1990, Nintendo's much-anticipated 16-bit console, the Super Famicom, was released in Japan. Its launch catalog, however, was one of the smallest of any console. Only 2 games were released alongside it: the highly expected next Mario game, Super Mario World, and a completely unfamiliar game by the name F-Zero. In August of the following year, the US saw the launch of the localized Super Nintendo Entertainment System. But despite the several months gap with the Japanese release, US players didn't have too many more options of games. There were 5 in total, with the new additions being Pilot Wings, Gradius 3, and SimCity. The lack of options, coupled with a very attractive cover art, especially the western one in my opinion, resulted in many initial adopters of the system all over the world being tempted to try out this new F-Zero game they had never heard before. And when they did, they found awesomeness. It was a truly futuristic racer like we had never seen before, in every sense of the word. Graphically, the 3D sensation using the Mode 7 system was impressive and immediately eye-catching. The vehicle's designs looked slick and cutting-edge. They hovered over the tracks, no wheels to be found, surpassing speeds of 500 km per hour or over 310 miles per hour, and we felt it, because the gameplay was fantastic, with exceedingly treacherous tracks to be traveled at such high speeds, so trying to manage impossible turns would force us to use the shoulder buttons, plus managing all sorts of hazards like pits to jump over, landmines to avoid, slippery ice, magnetic walls, and much more was challenging in all the right ways. The vehicles would get damaged and too much of it resulted in an explosion. So to counter that, the developers included a repair area in each track, where the player could drive over to get some of their hovercraft's durability replenished. F-Zero was a well-balanced, immersive, and ultimately a fun game, putting many of us in the edge of our seats with excitement, and it holds up today. When it came out, it was at the pinnacle of racing games in my opinion, and right now it is still an excellent game. I would give it a 8.6 out of 10. So it quickly became a critical and commercial success, receiving several accolades and selling over 2.8 million copies worldwide. They released semi-sequels or enhanced versions of the original F-Zero, including new cups, tracks, and vehicles, which were called BS F-Zero Grand Prix and BS F-Zero Grand Prix 2, that were downloaded using the broadcast satellite system only available in Japan called Satellaview. The first major sequel was a huge step up. F-Zero X. Produced in-house by Nintendo's VAD division, X is a masterpiece of a game. Not only did it successfully move the series into 3D, but it also introduced several new ideas that shaped the entire genre of futuristic racing games. With the jump to 3D and the more powerful hardware, the track's designs were remodeled to be roller coaster-like, a stark contrast to the flat surfaces of the original, and much more exciting too, with loops, tunnels, cylinders, and jumps. Oh, the jumps! They cause such a thrilling sensation, launching the hovercrafts up for a long time, but keeping us in control of it, still able to steer and dive down slower or faster, gaining a lot of speed, which feels fantastic. The power bar has now two purposes. It still signifies health, but from the second lap onwards can be spent a bit at a time in exchange for a boost, which creates a whole new dynamic to the gameplay, making it even more interesting. The hovercrafts are now capable of using a magnetic pull towards the sides, which helps managing sharp turns, but also by double tapping it, the machines will abruptly dash to the side, which is used to attack enemies, bashing them against the wall and causing them to explode in a spectacular fashion, resulting in a permanent removal of that racer for that particular track. And we also got a little star for every kill, and an extra life for every 5 kills in one race. The number of racers jumped from 4 plus a few generic guys to 30 racers, each a different character, expanding the lore of F-Zero, and each with a cool looking vehicle and different traits, while the races featured all 30 contestants at once on screen, which was amazing. It's impressive how they managed to pull this off, actually how they pulled off the entire game, considering that it runs at 60 frames per second, which is great for racing games and not common at all for 1998. It came at the cost of reduced details in the background, but no one cared about that. They made the right move here for sure. Unfortunately, it sold way less than the original F-Zero, reaching about 1.1 million copies sold worldwide, less than half of its predecessor. But that didn't stop Nintendo from believing in the franchise. Not yet, anyway. In Japan, similar to the broadcast satellite F-Zero Grand Prix games, Nintendo released an expansion kit for F-Zero X using the 64DD peripheral that introduced 2 new cups with 12 new tracks total, a machine creator, and a cars editor, allowing the players to customize their own racetracks and hovercars. Great new content for fans, but unfortunately the 64DD remained a Japan exclusive peripheral, so most of us were never able to play it. F-Zero X is a true masterpiece. In my opinion, it remains as the best futuristic racing game of all time, setting the bar real high for all racers to come. After that, Nintendo experimented with the series in a handheld for the first time. F-Zero Maximum Velocity came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2001, and it's a throwback to the SNES style of fast racing, with the flat racetracks. It's a great game that still holds up today. There's not much to say about it, it's pretty much exactly like the original, only with different vehicles and new tracks, all excellent by the way. It sold pretty well for a GBA game, almost reaching F-Zero X, and since this probably took way less time and resources to produce, it was likely a commercial success. In my view, Maximum Velocity is a bit better than the original F-Zero, so it gets an 8.8 out of 10. I'm going out of the chronological order now, as there are 2 more F-Zero games released for the GBA to talk about. The next one is F-Zero GP Legend. Now this is even better than Maximum Velocity, and it's my favorite flat zero game. GP Legend features a story mode, the first and only time we got it in a 2D F-Zero game, and it's pretty awesome. The story is in anime style, which fits the tone of the game very well, and it bounces between 8 different characters. The Grand Prix mode is also there, and it's as cool as ever, and the gameplay this time is improved in many ways. Finally, we have the same boosting mechanism as F-Zero X in a 2D entry, with you being able to spend some of your durability for boosts after the first lap is done. The combat mechanics are also included, although they're not as useful as F-Zero X, but it's a plus for sure. And overall the game is great, which is such a shame because this one sold way less than Maximum Velocity, only about 200,000 copies from what I could find online. GP Legend holds up very well today in my opinion, getting a 9.1 out of 10. Nintendo tried one more time to keep the series going with F-Zero Climax. This is a Japan exclusive game, so it's widely unknown, and it is for sure the worst one on the series, unfortunately. There are way too many repeated tracks, many from the original F-Zero actually, but your general speed is higher here, which makes the turns feel impossible at first. To counter that, you'll be forced to double tap the shoulder buttons for side dash over and over constantly, which is cool at first I guess, but becomes tiresome after a while. It does have good things going on for it, including a survival mode and modernized visuals compared to the other 2D F-Zeros, but it's just not as good as any other game on the series. F-Zero Climax gets a 7.2 out of 10. And finally, this last one came before GP Legend, and it's the last major effort from Nintendo on the F-Zero franchise, as it's the most complete game on the series to date. We're talking about F-Zero GX. GX is a beast of a game. It's by far the highest production value of all games on the series, even including a story mode with cutscenes, voiceover and everything. They are over the top and goofy, which some disliked, but I found them pretty charming. The game is awesome, but it has a big problem. It is too damn hard. The story mode in particular has a number of infuriating stages, with borderline impossible missions to beat, that will require a lot of trial and error. The Grand Prix mode is similar to F-Zero X, with awesome tracks, but once again, the difficulty goes a bit too far. Mute City stage here in the second cup, for instance, is insane. It has so many pitfalls one after another, to the point where maintaining high speeds is the riskiest thing ever. You will probably die over and over and have to start the cup all over. But despite the high difficulty, the game has a cool progression system where you gain points and exchange them for all manner of things, from each new character to unlock to even the next story stages. Everything has to be purchased, so there's a good incentive to keep playing, as it soon becomes an addictive gameplay loop that encourages you to try everything the game has to offer. It's pretty great. To me, GX is also a masterpiece, just not as excellent as X because of a few nitpicky details, such as the side dash not being effective to kill enemies anymore, and how they changed some of the characters, including my favorite Biorex, who became one of the worst characters. And since we're talking about characters, it's worth mentioning the arcade companion game called F-Zero AX. It introduces several new tracks and new characters through a whole new feature that allowed players to bring in their GameCube memory cards to the arcades and interchange characters, tracks and other data back and forth from the home console to the arcade machine. This was a way for people to unlock all new characters, vehicles and tracks from the arcade counterpart into GX. Later it was discovered that the data was hidden inside GX all along, locked behind the most difficult challenges, and could also be accessed with the help of a GameShark device. Even without the extra stuff from the arcade counterpart, GX is a fantastic game. It has a few minor problems, but it still holds up as one of the best futuristic racing games of all time, second only to F-Zero X in my opinion. I would give it a 9.6 out of 10, and playing it now to get this footage only makes me more desperate for a return of this criminally forgotten series. So while Nintendo is stringing us along indefinitely, I decided to take a look at what other people are doing in this genre and dug out every single F-Zero clone I could find and ranked them all in this first edition of Picking Up the Slack. So let's go. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the channel. This is From the Void. So here are the rules to include a game or not. Condition number 1, it has to be fast. Condition number 2, it has to be futuristic. Condition number 3, the vehicles need to hover over the tracks, no wheels allowed. There are gonna be only 2 exceptions to that rule, and they both have good reasons for it, I promise, but we'll get to that later. Condition number 4, the focus of the game has to be on the races against opponents, not against the clock and obstacles, so games like Air Race Speed and Nitronic Rush do not qualify. And condition number 5, the games have to be at least a little bit lesser known, which is the focus of this channel. So more established, well-known franchises that have similarities to F-Zero but have grown to be their own thing are not gonna be here. Those are Wipeout and Xtreme G, to be clear. That's it. They are awesome, by the way, just not the focus of this video. So alright, with all that out of the way, let's get to the list. When it comes to lesser known, fast racing, anti-gravity games, a good place to start is with Pacer! Yeah, as you can see, the soundtrack in this one is off the charts. It has a wide music selection and you can switch on or off each song as you wish. Pacer is a combat-focused anti-grav racer, more similar to Wipeout than to F-Zero, but fits the criteria for this list perfectly. It's a finely tuned game of this kind, with a good amount of skill required to stay inside the bounds of the tracks, especially in Elite level, where the speeds are ramped up even further, and it also features a good amount of depth in the combat side of things, with a satisfying customization system where you can choose 2 loadout weapons or defensive power-ups and 2 modifiers for each one. Everything needs to be unlocked by used credits earned through advancing in career mode, which works pretty well. The only problem I found was with some of the missions in career mode, which are not explained very well, but other than that, this is a perfectly solid anti-gravity racer with tight controls and a lot to dig into. Pacer gets a 8.3 out of 10, fitting right about there in the F-Zero scale of greatness. It's available on PCs, PlayStation 4, as well as Xbox One and Series. And next we have Trailblazers. Ah, Trailblazers. I remember playing this one at launch a few years ago. I found it very original and visually gorgeous. Playing it again to get this footage was a nice throwback. I enjoyed it just as much as I did in the first time, and also found the exact same problems. Trailblazers is certainly a cool game with the unique gimmick of allowing the player to paint the tracks, which prompted a lot of comparisons to Splatoon, of all things. You can also shoot the paint forward, which spends more than normal, but can also be used to attack enemies, causing them to spin around and lose speed. Once you painted the tracks, passing over your own color will grant you a boost, and the more you stay on it, the bigger the speed multiplier will be, which feels awesome. However, that's it. This is all the game has to offer in terms of mechanisms. There are no other ways to boost, no other ways to attack, no additional layers to make the game more interesting, and the novelty of the paint is not enough to sustain the entire game, unfortunately. This is further worsened by the lacking level design that never introduces anything new, like new obstacles or track styles, only new visuals. And also by one issue with the racing itself. You get stuck a lot in this game, crashing into walls or even worse other cars, cars will result in a longer than expected waste of time because it's a struggle to get out of the jam. On the positive side, Trailblazers has a story mode, which I enjoyed a lot, that will have you controlling each character and their unique hover cars with different traits, and each stage presents a variety of missions to beat, which is great for completionists, so this is the best mode in the game in my opinion. Trailblazers certainly was a little bit of a letdown, but that's because the game has so much more potential than was ultimately delivered here. But it's still a fun time for sure, deserving nothing less than a 7.9 in my opinion, fitting right about there. Trailblazers is available on the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One and PCs. Following up with colorful Super Pilot. This one is still in early access on Steam, but it's getting close to release as the most recent build as of the making of this video is version 0.8.0, which added a lot of new features including updates to the track editor. And this is one of the coolest things about Super Pilot. I tried out the editor and I'm happy to report that it's easy to learn and quick to create tracks, which can be uploaded and shared online, so making your own and playing other people's tracks is for sure an attractive feature of this game. As for the gameplay, Super Pilot is also absolutely solid. There is only one weird thing about it, not bad, just weird. It auto-adjusts your vehicle alignment every time you let go of the direction, straightening it forward, which feels odd. It's like there's someone else moving it, but it also makes the game a little bit easier, so some will not like it while others will prefer having it. But it's not a huge deal, because everything else feels on point. The sense of speed is certainly there, it mimics a lot of things from the 3D F-Zeros, such as the boost unlocking in the second lap, and using it means making yourself vulnerable as it fills in the damage meter. However, it auto-repairs, so you don't need to pass through a repair area. Another difference is that it adds a drift boost, just like Mario Kart, which is very helpful on expert mode. It also has different types of tiles, including the icy one, that will force you to turn the opposite direction you wanna go, which complicates things in a good way. Another similarity to F-Zero is the overwhelming number of racers. It goes well beyond 30, presenting a staggering 48 cars on screen. This, however, highlights one thing that is sorely missing: the combat mechanisms. With such a huge amount of opponents, it would be great if we could knock some of them out, but we can hope that they are still implementing this at a later update. But even without it, this is already a rather excellent futuristic racer, and with the rare feature of the track editor, Super Pilot is certainly a strong competitor, getting a solid 8 out of 10, fitting right about there. Next is the GameCube exclusive Tube Slider. As the title implies, this one is all about tunnels. Glass tunnels, a lot of them, which is nice. Gives you that chill of vertigo looking at the landscapes below. Visually, it's all fine considering its time period, but gameplay-wise, Tube Slider is problematic. It is way too obtuse and demanding. To succeed in this game, you have to carefully position yourself in the right part of the tunnel, because any mistake is punished severely. If your position is a bit off, you may fly off the ground, losing almost all your momentum, which also means losing the race, because this is one of those games that allows your opponents to shoot away miles ahead as soon as they are out of sight, quickly becoming unreachable. It's brutal. Turning is also painful. It's a constant struggle of applying the brakes and the side boosters to keep your vehicle stable. Doing a turn incorrectly leads to a lot of slipping, which is infuriating, and every time you slip or an enemy bumps into you, it's very likely that your hovercraft will become unstable, tilted in a weird angle. And to make things even worse, Tube Slider has a control scheme that is not well explained in the tutorial, so long story short, this game has great presentation and ideas, could have been an awesome F-Zero contender, but the execution makes the experience almost completely unenjoyable. This is a 5.2 out of 10, so it goes right about here. Next we have a freaking awesome one, Grip. This is one of the exceptions to the no wheels rule, but for good reasons. Half of the vehicles here don't have wheels. They hover over the tracks just like F-Zero. And even the ones that do behave in an anti-gravitational way. And this is one of the highlights of this game. Every vehicle is capable of gripping to any surface, floors, walls or ceilings, and they can flip upside down and carry on no problem. It's pretty cool, and the level design makes fantastic use of this mechanism too. This track, for instance, will have you bouncing from floor to ceiling and back again, then funneling you down a drop tunnel, then looping you up in a sharp turn. It's freaking fantastic, seriously. Another positive are the brakes. Yeah, believe it or not, this makes a huge difference here. Grip has the best brake mechanics of all games on the list. It's finely tuned, feels just right, so you can manage the turns at high velocities with their aid. It's great, and needless to say, the graphics here are fantastic, including the special effects for the combat stuff, which gets a hard focus in this game. You grab items just like Mario Kart, which can be a missile spread, machine guns, a homing missile, boosts, shields, you name it, and you unlock more as you progress. Grip has two problems though, in my opinion. It punishes you too hard for a crash, even when it's caused by the AI, which feels infuriating, and the campaign is not deep enough, but not too bad either. So I see both as minor problems, not enough to remove this game's appeal or detract from its high quality. Grip gets a great 8.7 in my view, so let's place it right about there. It's available on Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One and Series, and PCs. Next, a completely obscure copycat of the original F-Zero for a change. This is Uchuu Race Astro Go-Go. Yeah. Uchuu Race Astro Go-Go, let's go! This is a Japan exclusive Super Famicom game, but it could have been localized very easily. The only two words in Japanese here are Uchuu and Race, right there in the title. The rest of the game, from the characters' names to the congratulations screen, is 100% in English, so you can emulate and play this one easily. And as you can see, it's very similar to the original F-Zero. The major difference being the fact that the camera does not rotate around you. It stays locked to one direction the entire time. Even in sharp 90-degree turns, 180 turns, 2070-degree turns, whew! Wow, it's crazy. I really dig that you can see your car front side moving into the camera, and it's not detrimental to the gameplay since it only happens in sections where you don't need to steer your vehicle almost whatsoever. This is a pretty cool game actually. The characters are fun, their hover cars are pretty dope, especially the green scorpion here. The controls are tight and the difficulty is well balanced. However, there are two problems with Uchuu Race Astro Go-Go. First, hitting the walls suddenly turns the game into a pinball machine. You hit them hard enough and you will bounce all over and end up facing the wrong side. It's a nuisance, but manageable. While the second problem could be way worse, I think. The ice levels. There are only 2 of them in the entire game, but they suck a lot. It's not like in F-Zero where you slide a bit and can't make turns as well, which makes sense, you know, with the laws of physics and all, but in Uchuu Race Astro Go-Go, both the ice tiles and the snow patches spin you around like a banana peel in Mario Kart, flips you the other way for no logical reason. It sucks. I don't know who programmed the ice levels, but that guy sucks too. But other than that, the whole game is actually pretty great. There are some cool ideas to be found here. One stage is water themed, and when going over the water parts, you'll be lifted by a bunch of floating propellers, which changes the gameplay in a very cool way. So yeah, there we have it. Uchuu Race Astro Go-Go. Cool game with a few problems, but still pretty fun. I give it a decent 7.1. Moving on to a series that got a good amount of attention and has been releasing one game per Nintendo console, talking about the Fast Racing series. There are 3 games on this franchise. The original was Fast Racing League, which was a WiiWare exclusive title, so it's no longer available in a legit way, only through emulation. The gimmick on this entire series is to mix anti-gravity racing with the Ikaruga duality system. In the races you'll find black or white stripes and even magnetic ceilings that will require you to have your vehicles be in the same color. Here, for example, if your vehicle was in the black color, it would not have glue to the ceiling, so you would fall. So you need to press the button and switch to white for it to work. It's a neat idea that adds a welcome layer to the gameplay dynamic, and the entire game controls perfectly well. It received great scores at the time, but since then we've had some major games upping the ante, so it doesn't hold up as well today. I give it a 7.8 out of 10, it goes right here. Then the next 2 games on the series I'll group together, cause they're very similar. Those are Fast Racing Neo, which is a Wii U exclusive, and Fast RMX, which is a Switch exclusive. Now, you may or may not consider RMX an enhanced part of Neo, because it does feature all the tracks from Neo, including the DLC ones, and all the vehicles as well, but the tracks are in a different Grand Prix structure. Neo has 4 races per cup, while RMX splits them further for more cups with 3 races each, and it adds a lot of new racetracks and cars. If you haven't played either, for sure go straight for RMX, but there may be a reason to get both depending on how much you like them. Gameplay wise, they improved a lot from the Wii original, with a more robust feeling for the driving. The colors are now blue and orange instead of black and white, which makes them easier to see and react to, and the visuals are drastically improved. Those are great games, but be advised that the expert mode is insanely difficult, borderline impossible actually. You will have to count with a good amount of luck to succeed. I give Racing Neo a 8.1 out of 10 and RMX an 8.2. Next is Radial-G Racing Revolved. This one focuses almost completely in one type of track from F-Zero, the cylinders. It's pretty interesting actually, at least for a while. The devs implemented a number of simple but clever ideas. At points, half of the cylinder goes away, forcing you to move to the other side. So for you to be able to react accordingly, you will need to pay attention to the red and green colored indicators and position your hovercraft in the green side. There are also rotating obstacles to avoid in a similar way, and other parts will require you to pay attention to the blue indicators to be able to move up and out of the cylinder into another section or tunnel to avoid hazards. You are always looking for the boosts scattered around, since your own manual boosts are rather limited. This becomes much more complicated in the combat races, but they are unfortunately the weakest aspect of this game. In those you can find orange tiles to activate randomized weapons to use, like Mario Kart, with the more common one being a machine gun that auto-aims at the closest enemy. This could have been great, but the implementation is too limited. It auto-aims, has a long delay, too few bullets, while also taking too many shots to be effective, plus there is little to no way to avoid others from shooting you, so the balance in this part of the game feels off. Radial-G is certainly pretty interesting, but the novelty of the cylinder races wears off after a while, and the combat mode is underwhelming. This is a real shame because the game has great potential. Hopefully a sequel will harness it better. Radial-G Racing Revolved gets a solid 7 out of 10. It's available on PCs and PlayStation 4. Next we have one that sold better than any F-Zero game. We're talking about Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. This is of course based on the pod racing sport featured in the first episode of the prequel trilogy, released all the way back on the N64 and PCs, where you get to control all the different species of characters from the movie, and the races take place on many different locations and planets. The variety in this game is pretty awesome. The footage you're seeing is from the HD version released very recently in 2020 for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, One, which improves the graphics, frame rate, and on the Switch adds motion control options. It's a very faithful part of the original, still looking very dated, but playing just as well, which is great because Episode 1 is an excellent racer in my opinion. The main gimmick here comes from the boost mechanism. More difficult races will force you to use the boost as much as possible, but to do so is kinda tricky. You need to press and hold up until the right sidebar fills in, then press the boost button with the correct timing. Doing so during the races while steering and handling the aggressive opponents introduces a welcome challenge. You will also have to mind the engine's temperature. The more you boost, the more the engine overheats, so you'll need to apply the brakes manually to cool them down. After each race you gain money, which you can use to buy parts for your vehicles and even new droids to help repairing it faster. Adding all that to the many splitting paths found in the races results in quite an enjoyable experience, especially in later levels. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a solid 8 nowadays, since it's a bit dated in some aspects, but certainly still worth playing. Back in the day I would have given a 8.5 or so. Like I said, there is a remastered version that was released about 2 years ago for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, while the original versions came for PCs, Nintendo 64 and a bit later for the Dreamcast as well. And there's also a Game Boy Color version, and it plays okay. I would give it a 6, but I'm not gonna include it in the rankings. Star Wars Racers became a whole series, with the next one to talk about being Star Wars Racer Revenge. This is a PlayStation 2 exclusive, now featuring grown-up Anakin Skywalker that somehow got back into pod racing in his Jedi spare time, and once again includes a sizable roster with many interesting species and interesting locations, expanding the lore of the Star Wars universe, allowing us to visit never before seen planets. Gameplay wise, it's pretty decent too. It simplifies the boost mechanism. You just need to press R2, so they removed the dynamic boosting from the original, but the AI is much better in this game, presenting tougher challenges, as you are now constantly facing the threat of exploding and losing the race immediately. Even though no one has combat moves per se, manually bashing into an enemy, especially if you're boosting, will cause a good amount of damage, which the game incentivizes you to take advantage of by showing you the enemy's health bars. So it's worth it to bash into an opponent whose health is already in the red zone. I enjoyed this feature a lot. It makes the races more thrilling in a simple and easy to understand way. I also enjoyed the track's designs here, with multiple paths to choose, which is pretty cool. Racer Revenge is a pretty competent sequel, though not as good as the original. Back in the day I would have given it a better score for sure, but right now it gets a 7.6. So let's place it right about there. And finally, the absolute worst one in the series is Star Wars Super Bombad Racing. This is terrible, terrible, terrible. It also barely qualifies, it's more like a kart game, with the focus being on the pickups and the combat side, and in this one you get to use Yoda and other more recognizable franchise characters, but the gameplay is abysmal. It feels very floaty and groggy, there's absolutely nothing good about this, the art design is ugly, the pickups don't work half the time, level design is all over the place, with buildings and places haphazardly put together, and it has Jar Jar Binks, so it could not have been worse. I give this one a 2 at best. Stay the hell away from this. Following up with the Redout series. I'll say it right away. The two Redout games are some of the best games in this kind for sure. They are, however, demanding, especially in the control scheme, but in my opinion it's totally worth the time invested to overcome the steep learning curve, especially in Redout 2. This is how they work. R2 is gas, L2 is brakes, R1 and L1 are boosts. There are two different kinds of them in Redout 2, and finally the strafing is done using the right circle pad. So yeah, it's completely different from F-Zero, and switching from one series to the other was really confusing for my muscle memory. But like I said, the demanding control scheme is worth it. The two Redout games introduce a lot of new ideas that I enjoyed quite a bit. For example, in a loop or in a steeply inclined part of the track, you'll need to strafe upwards or downwards to compensate for the pull or push that happens due to the gravity and centripetal forces and all that unusual physics stuff, and doing so prevents you from losing speed as well as flying off the road. You have quite a lot of freedom in the Redout games when it comes to flying off. In certain parts you can do it on purpose. Take a look at this moment. I fly off and manage to loop in the air and land back in the track. This was pretty fucking awesome if you ask me. In fact, the entire mix of sensations, from the sheer speed to the amount of things you have to care about and the stunning beautiful vistas in the background, especially in 2, are absolutely breathtaking. There is also a great amount of variety in the career modes in both games, which are divided into events that can be championships, single races, time attacks, last man standings, special boss races, missions, you name it. Completing each event allows you to unlock loads of customization options for your vehicles. They are different from 1 to 2, but both are engaging, although the UI takes some time to get used to in both. Seriously, the Redout games are fantastic. If you're looking for a modern anti-grav racer with amazing sense of speed and a lot of production value, pick whichever one of the two and go for it. The sequel got lower scores than the original, but I really don't know what these reviewers were talking about. I prefer 2 to the original actually. To me, Redout 1 is a 8.3 out of 10 with a more linear experience and less complex controls, while Redout 2 is easily a 8.9. I would have given it a 9 or more if the tutorial weren't one of the worst ever, but if you get past it, this is one of the best entries in this entire list for sure. Redout 2 is available on Nintendo Switch, PlayStations 4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, and PCs, while Redout 1 is available on the same platforms except for PlayStation 5. Moving on to Antigraviator. This one has some good ideas but lacks polish in the gameplay. It looks fine and the sense of speed is certainly present, but the vehicles feel way too floaty and the physics feel off, especially in the collisions with walls, enemies and obstacles. The obstacles are one of the cool ideas though. In Antigraviator you collect little cylinders scattered through the tracks that can be exchanged for boosts or to activate traps for your opponents. In specific moments during the race, a special icon will appear, and if you're fast at pressing the trap button, you activate them for a lot of different effects, like homing missiles, meteors, flamethrowers, and a lot more. It's pretty cool. This may also open secret shortcuts. It's a cool idea, but it fades away after a while because it's too context sensitive. You can't really control them, so it feels too gimmicky after the initial novelty effect. Another cool thing about this game is that most of the information is in the vehicle itself, cleaning up the screen, which I enjoyed. But like I said, despite a few good ideas, the gameplay is lacking. It gets repetitive fast, especially because of some really long races, so overall this is a letdown. Antigraviator falls flat. I give it a 6.1 out of 10. It's available on PCs, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and Series. Next is a completely unexpected, franchise-based movie adaptation that is actually excellent and a total highlight in this list: Speed Racer, the video game. This is a total oddball. In fact, it didn't review too well at the time, lots of 7s, but it has been gathering more and more attention, to the point where it's now somewhat of a cult classic. Now, before we get to why, let me just say that this is one of the exceptions I was talking about to the no wheels floating over the tracks rule. And the reason for that is very simple. The wheels here behave in completely impossible ways, so it feels just like a floating car. They turn 180 degrees, allowing your car to go forward while facing any direction, and the tracks are just as roller coaster like as any other 3D game on the list, with the vehicles defying gravity in every single way. So the anti-grav spirit is still found here just as well as in any other game on the list. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about Speed Racer, the video game. It's such a cool game, this one. The sense of speed is really felt here, especially with not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 levels of boosts you can use, with the final one putting you in another dimension of pure purple speed, which is awesome. It pretty much works like the Banzai Bill power-up of Mario Kart, but the main focus of Speed Racer lies in the combat mechanics. There are so many of what they call carfu moves you can pull off, like bashing, spin jumping, tail flipping, roundhousing. It's a lot and it feels awesome to do them all. My biggest gripe with the game though, and the only reason I'm not giving it a much better score, is that it doesn't feature a rear view button, which would be a game changer here, believe me, because you always get hit out of the blue from racers coming in from outside of your view with no way to anticipate them, so you're left guessing when the opponents are gonna strike. The races themselves are less about making the turns and much more about the combat, but driving well does give you an important advantage, as you need to stay inside the tracks without touching the side barriers to fill in the boost meter. Speed Racer is a pretty cool game, surprisingly so. It's not anything traditional in terms of racing games, but totally worth playing in my opinion. It's available for the PlayStation 2 and on the Wii, where you'll use motion controls to do the steering and the combat moves, which works perfectly fine. There is also a dumbed down version for Nintendo DS that looks like this and plays rather well for what it is, but the home console versions are the ones to go to. Speed Racer the video game is not perfect, but it offers something quite unique in this genre, so I see it as a game worth playing for sure. I give it an 8.2 out of 10. Try this one out, it's pretty awesome. Next is MegaRace 3. Lord. This one is terrible, straight up. It's a PlayStation 2 game available on Steam as well that has one cool idea, I guess. The vehicles are tiny, the size of ants or something, or even tinier. In this race here it seems like you're inside an organism, but everything else about it is horrible. The camera is the worst. It jitters a lot, it's constantly trying to give you seizures, the controls are too basic, there is no strafing to the sides, only regular steering, the combat mechanics are worthless, nothing works, the bullets you shoot go straight down to the floor, you can't hit anything, the shields and boosts are theoretical, I could not get them to work at all, the level designs are okay, but the jittery camera makes anything other than straightforward tracks give you a headache, and the campaign mode called Catastrophe is very aptly named, with scripted races with terrible execution, like hazards feeling unavoidable, nothing is explained, there's no purpose or goal to anything. MegaRace 3 is a complete mess, plus it's one of those that features an edgy 90s style commercial announcer saying nonsense things, which was cringy back then, but now it's just sad. This game killed the series too. The previous two titles are decent, actually I believe the original is a great racing game. Only 3 fits this list because it's the only futuristic style hovercraft racing. But anyway, MegaRace 3 is terrible in my opinion, almost unplayable. It gets a 2.5 out of 10, stay away. Next we've got something completely different, Lightfield Hyper Edition. Okay, before we get to it, this is the least F-Zero-like out of any game on the list. It still fits the conditions, the vehicles float, it's futuristic, races are a focus, and it's somewhat fast, but it does a lot of different things to the point where I would totally understand if you feel like it shouldn't be here. But I decided to include it anyway because this is for sure a hidden gem. It's actually one of my favorite games on the list. However, it wasn't at first. Lightfield takes half an hour or so to grab you. It's all about freedom, this game. It's a racer for the most part, but you can move anywhere you want at any time, seriously. So it's immediately different from anything else, and with a unique control scheme too. You accelerate with R2, and with X on a PlayStation controller, you force the aircraft close to the surface. And doing so will have you gain more and more speed, so you will want to stick to surfaces as much as possible to gain speed, and also to pass through the checkpoints, which are mandatory. And you can stick to any goddamn surface you want, it's pretty awesome. The control scheme is actually really enjoyable, with with tricks to pull off, such as ledge jumps and drifts to gain more speed, and even the simple act of steering feels great. The game is divided into stages or challenge missions with varying objectives. Most of them are regular races against opponents or time attacks, where you see the racers representing the times to beat. Other stages will be about grabbing collectibles while exploring the magnificent locations or doing tricks in specific ways. What's cool about all of this is that it feels awesome to experiment and find new paths to clear the missions, using the incredible freedom of movement available. Anyway, I could keep talking about Lightfield. It's a great game, truly worth playing. It is well suited for racer fans, I believe. So believe me, it's a great game.
It gets an 8.5 out of 10.
It's available on Xbox One, PlayStation 4 and Steam. Next is insanely fast G-Surfers. This is a PlayStation 2 exclusive, so the graphics are a bit outdated now. They weren't at the time though, but this game is fast, man. Crazy fast. Too fast. Yeah, even for a big F-Zero fan, there is such a thing as too fast. It feels uncontrollable, especially because the movement is way too sensitive. Any little tilt to the sides turns your car too much. Even if you choose one of the more stable hover cars, it doesn't make a difference. You'll be bouncing off from wall to wall, which will cause huge amounts of damage, so staying alive in this game is the hardest thing ever. Even in the first race in easy mode, the frame rate here is also a big issue, and at these speeds, any frame is precious, so even for someone who normally doesn't have any issues with frame rate, which is my case, G-Surfers will pose a problem. This game does have a track editor, which is cool, but the same issues apply once again. The game is so fast and impossible to manage that creating a racetrack is no fun at all, because you need to make really long straight lines, no sharp turns, no inclines, because you will send yourself flying. So yeah, there is some enjoyment to be had here because of the absolutely insane speed, which some may enjoy, but this is only for the most hardcore fans of this kind of game and only as a curiosity as well. So I would not recommend G-Surfers. It gets a 3.5 out of 10. Following up with Sega Saturn exclusive Cyber Speedway. This is a decent racer for its time, but the presentation here is the worst aspect. Not only did the graphics not age too well, but the frame rate is also problematic, which is a major problem for a racing game. I don't own a Sega Saturn, so I had to resort to emulating this one, and even ramping up the specs for the video quality, it still looks choppy and ugly. And on top of that, the cutscenes here feature some of the most horrible drawings for characters I've ever seen in a game. I mean, look at this. Jeez. The gameplay is solid though, the controls are simple and easy to learn, you can boost and pick up missiles, you can carry up to 5 of them, and when using them they cause an explosion which you can make good use of if you get the hang of it. It's a rather decent game, it just didn't age all that well, so most people will not find any reason to play it now, I believe. It still gets a 6.9 out of 10 in my view. Next we have Quantum Redshift. This is a OG Xbox exclusive, and I gotta say, presentation wise it's pretty impressive for its time. Do note however that I had to emulate this one since I don't own a original Xbox and my emulator had some trouble running this game. It's messing up the layers, so bear in mind that this footage is not making the game justice. I apologize for that. But anyway, this is actually a pretty decent game. You have access to several power-ups, each used by one of the face buttons. A is for boosts, which replenish every lap, then everything else you get from pickups pickups. Y is the shield to protect yourself from enemy attacks, while X and B are two different types of attacks. The power-up balance here is actually great, and it makes the races a lot of fun. I enjoyed Quantum Redshift a lot, even with the emulation problems. The characters' models, though, are really ugly looking nowadays, and the voiceover is also very underwhelming. But other than that, this is a surprisingly positive game. It gets a 7.7 out of 10, so let's rank it over here. Following up with Fatal Inertia. I think that the 8th generation of video games was the least graced with futuristic racing games out of any generation since the original F-Zero, especially on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. For those two consoles, the only two options I could find were Wipeout HD and this one. Fatal Inertia is a fun, futuristic combat racer developed by Koei, of all people, with an impressive variety of weapons to use against your opponents. Seriously, it has a lot of stuff, and most of them can be used in two ways, either pressing L1 or R1. Magnets that slow the enemies down and smoke bombs to make them lose their way can be thrown ahead or behind you. Rockets and pulse bombs can also be thrown or used on yourself as a boost, and wires can be attached to enemies to pull them back or to walls and rocks to pull yourself forward, and a lot more. It's pretty cool actually. The game also controls well, it's all pretty standard except for the addition of a barrel roll to get rid of the magnets, which is the most common weapon. The game is well made, looks great, and it's fun overall, except for the later levels, where the difficulty ramps up too much with the enemies becoming relentless, which I bet will be a turnoff for most people. There is a good amount of customization on your hover cars to balance things out, but it's still going to be a lot of trial and error in the final difficulty. I give Fatal Inertia a 7.1 out of 10. And to close things off, here are the upcoming F-Zero style racers, and believe me, I've left the best for last. This first one is the greatly named Voidspeed Outlaw. As you can see, this is going for the original style F-Zero. It does have more of a combat focus, it seems, with projectiles. You can also jump over obstacles, which could be cool. And apparently there is gonna be a story here, as I see some cutscene shots, and that's always welcome in my opinion. I'm certainly looking forward to Voidspeed Outlaw. It's currently only confirmed for PCs on Steam with no release date yet, but I think this would be a great fit for the Switch, so I hope the dev is looking into it. Next we have Gravity Chase. This one is coming for Xbox and PCs. It looks okay, but people who got to review the closed demo were not too impressed by it. Apparently it's too bare bones. The ideas are good though. It's a racer with shooting mechanics in tubes, cylinders and half pipes, so I'm still interested in it, especially if they manage to increase the game's scope, which seems to be the main problem. There are enough ideas here to justify a closer look, so let's hope. And finally, the absolute highlight of the entire list is Aero GPX. Get ready for this one, cause it's more of a F-Zero spiritual successor as anything out there. It's incredibly faithful to the 3D F-Zeros, while also implementing a lot of clever and awesome ideas into the mix. Gameplay wise, we have the familiar spin, the side dash, the boost, though health and boost powers are in different meters, and on top of that we have some awesome new stuff. The spin can be used against the walls to gain more speed, lunging you forward, which I think causes damage, so it's a good idea to use it while replenishing the life meter in the repair area. And there is also a rotation around the horizontal axis, which can be used in air to spiral downwards, gaining even more speed. And the new ideas don't end there. To make better use of this new spin, there are entire segments of airborne racing, with your vehicle being lifted by air currents, and man, this looks awesome if you ask me. Also, the game incentivizes allows you to detach from the ground in the cylinder parts of the race by rotating around it in order to become airborne and use the new spin mechanism. Again, freaking awesome. I am really hyped for Aero GPX, seriously. It's not only the most similar game to F-Zero X, but also introduces great new ideas. So yeah, put this on your radar for sure. So yeah, when it comes to F-Zero clones, it seems that the best is yet to come. And who knows, with the Switch install base, maybe Nintendo is looking to revive the series. I'm sure it would be a commercial success if they advertise it half well. There was a rumor about a year ago or so of a Star Fox racing game that would be a mix of the two franchises together, but whether or not Nintendo revives the F-Zero franchise, there are some awesome games in present, past and future for us to try out. So I hope you found some that interested you, or that I at least entertained you for a bit. And what other futuristic racing games have I missed that fit the criteria? I'm sure there are some, let me know and I'll add them to a pinned comment. This has been my tribute to F-Zero with a retrospective and all of the F-Zero clones I could find, since they are picking up the slack for Nintendo. This is a new series I'm trying out, so if you liked it, let me know. The like button is also important to let the algorithm know that it should suggest this to more people. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you soon.